Hey everybody, welcome back to the studio. I'm Joe and I'm going to be talking to you today, giving you a little bit of a timeline, a little bit of a history lesson on how Peter Jackson got the rights to the Lord of the Rings series. And then that parlays itself into The Hobbit, and then we'll even talk a little bit about the Rings of Power and their rights. When I say we'll, or we will, I'm referring to my wingman Wyatt over here. He's going to be joining me in conversation throughout the video. So let's get into it, and here we go. So, Peter Jackson got the rights to The Lord of the Rings, and traditionally, there's been rumors around that J.R.R. Tolkien was a little bit protective of giving the rights away for his books. Have you heard that, Wyatt?
I have heard that.
Yes, it's not incorrect. So the first thing I want to point out is when he sold the rights to, or a limited amount of rights to his story. So first, let's pull up the first slide. In 1969, United Artists acquired the film, television, stage, and merchandising rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings from author J.R.R. Tolkien, who retains the book publishing rights. So right off the bat, he sold it to United Artists. I've heard that it was actually begrudgingly selling off some of the rights to make some money for some taxes that were owed.
A little bit of that tax money.
A little bit of that tax money he had to pay up.
That'll
So he's
always
like,
get you.
what is worth money that I have? My stories. So United Artists grabbed it up. It turns out United Artists didn't do a ton with it. So actually, I don't even, there's not a whole lot of information I found exactly what they did with it, but the person who really took advantage of it was this guy named Saul Zaentz. Zaentz? Saul Zaentz.
Zaentz?
No, it's Zaentz. I looked it up earlier. In 1976, Saul Zaentz production company acquires the film and other rights for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings from United Artists. And actually, he was a bit connected with United Artists because just a little bit later, he produced a film that was, well, he basically set up a foundation first, but in 1978, Saul Zaentz produced the animated film The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralph Bakshi. So this is the first piece of film or animation or anything besides the literature from Lord of the Rings, and Saul Zaentz produced it. And United Artists actually was one of the distributing companies for it.
Have you seen the whole cartoon Lord of the Rings?
I have. Now, this was actually the only one that is kind of follows Saul Zaentz's ownership of these copyrights, essentially. Mm-hmm. Because after this, Warner Brothers created these spin-offs, Return of the King and The Hobbits, right?
Yeah.
And Saul Zaentz wasn't really involved with them. I'm guessing that they purchased a limited amount of rights to create these films, but he wasn't involved with that. He, however, was producing this. When he acquired the rights in 1977, right before this film, Mr. Zaentz, he set up Tolkien Enterprises, which is basically a company that is dedicated to selling rights or selling limited right options for creative endeavors with Tolkien's work. And then they later called it Middle-earth Enterprises in 2010.
So, quick question.
Yes.
The company is set up just for selling rights to Middle-earth?
Basically.
That's the whole company?
Basically. Well, it's like a branch. He owns a company called the Saul Zaentz Company, and this was like a part of it because he owned the rights for the film, television, stage, merchandising rights that was initially sold off to United Artists.
Okay.
So, going on from there, much later in 1997, Saul Zaentz Company options their film rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits to Miramax Films. Now, Believe Miramax was owned by the fellow who had a little bit of controversy not too long ago. I think this was the Weinstein guy. The one that was acting all decrepit.
Right.
Yeah. That everyone at the Oscars thanks.
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I know who Weinstein is.
So he was very much involved with this. And Peter Jackson was actually going to work with them, create Lord of the Rings in 2 films. Turns out they backed out and said, we want you to make the whole thing in one, basically, 90-minute film. The whole thing.
The whole thing.
That's when Peter Jackson freaked out. He had a conversation with Saul Zaentz himself, and he had connections to New Line Cinema. And New Line Cinema said, yeah, we'll make 3 movies for you. So Peter Jackson no longer wanting to work with Miramax, and Saul Zaentz wanting Peter Jackson's vision of the film to come through. New Line Cinema bought the rights, which is a smaller branch of Warner Brothers. They bought the rights off from Miramax that they had originally purchased, and that's when we got The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits later down the road. That's how they personally got the rights to it. What stands out to you the most thus far, Wyatt?
If I'm keeping it all straight, the first guy had just the Lord of the Rings cartoon that he made, correct?
Yeah, but he owned the rights to it.
Okay.
So the copyright laws are difficult. You know what I mean?
And that's where we got the that terrible Lord of the Rings cartoon with the rotoscoping and
that first
weird, scary stuff. Because I
there
remember
was a couple of them, but Saul Zaentz did the first.
Because I remember The Hobbit actually being animated. It was an animated movie. There wasn't any like rotoscoping stuff.
Yeah.
And it was I think it was much less creepy because of that.
That came after this one.
Okay, I got you.
The Lord of the Rings, produced by Saul Zaentz and directed by Ralph Bakshi.
And then Peter Jackson, after Miramax, it was
New Line Cinema.
New Line Cinema.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's skipping around now. Saul Zaentz, his company, basically sold the rights for the film side of things. This is where things, I believe, gets a little bit more pulled around. You know what I mean? So you have the initial sell-off from Tolkien was film, stage, merchandising, TV, and that was kind of a big package. That's what Saul Zaentz picked up and put under his company. And then you have the things like selling off rights for the films. And then you have the one thing that flies under the radar, unless you're a big gamer, is the amount of money that Saul Zaentz has made through Lord of the Rings video games.
Oh, yeah.
A ton of money. Probably more than the films.
I'm sure he's made, because I remember the, what were they called? Do you remember the Shadow of Mordor? Are you familiar with that game?
Yes, I think I am. I never
It was
played them,
Shadow of Mordor. It was kind of like an open world game where you play as a human. His family is murdered. I think you're murdered. And then you have the soul, like a ring wraith of Celebrimbor.
Okay.
Who's following you around. And, and so there were 2 games off of that. Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War.
Yeah.
I think so.
It honestly makes me think that, well, the thing is, Mr. Zaentz, he injected himself into the film industry since the 60s, right?
Is this Zaentz?
This is him. This was not too long ago. He has passed away.
Okay.
I think it was...
Rest in peace.
It wasn't too long ago. Probably about 10, 12 years ago he passed away. So he was pretty old when they were doing Lord of the Rings, and he might have passed away before The Hobbits. Perhaps. I don't know exactly his resting date. However, this guy was extremely smart. He picked up basically a copyright that at the time nobody knew what to do with. And still nobody, even in the film world, didn't know what to do with it until the late 90s. And still Peter Jackson had such a hard time getting it off the ground, because the only people that believed in him was New Line Cinema. Miramax didn't even believe in him, and honestly, because they were like, you're going to do this, but honestly, we're worried about dumping too much into this because it doesn't seem like it can be done. So think about Saul Zaentz coming in the 70s and grabbing this up from United Artists and doing his own animated film and then just holding on to it for like
just holding on
30,
to
40
Lord
years.
of the Rings. It's just Lord of the Rings.
It's just Lord of the Rings. And it's just kind of interesting. It hasn't moved through too many people's hands, kind of until recently.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, obviously, we know about the Rings of Power. And there's a lot of question as far as like, what does the Rings of Power actually own? There's a lot of speculation there. So, to put this to rest, they kind of flew in under the radar and grabbed up a copyright that's kind of like a backdoor copyright. Okay?
I see.
So, I don't know. Can you read this, Wyatt?
Yeah, hold on.
I want to see.
Cut it off.
I want you to read it and stop when I see what I'm trying to get at.
So what did Amazon buy? We have the rights solely
This is
to
a
the
direct
Fellowship.
quote from the showrunners, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Don't interrupt me.
Sorry.
We have the rights solely to the Fellowship of the Ring,
Mm-hmm.
the Two Towers, the Return of the King, the Appendices, and the Hobbit. Payne says this is J.D. Payne, and that's it. And that is it. We do not have the rights to the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales. Wait, okay, so they have the rights to the three, Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, and the Hobbit.
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. They don't have the film rights. They have the TV rights, but actually they couldn't get TV rights the way that they were presented because they were presented TV rights for 3 episodes or less. So they had to come in and say, we can gain rights to basically 3 or more episodes. So
okay.
Amazon Prime is limited in copyright law to have to keep this a series. They can't do films. They can't do, unless they later on buy more rights to this.
So let me see. It takes a huge chunk of lore off the table and has left Tolkien fans wondering how this duo plans to tell a second age story without access to those. That's the big kicker right there.
Yeah,
no access to those materials.
Yeah.
There's a version of everything we need for the second age in the books we have the rights to. Okay, yeah. McKay says, as long as we're painting within those lines and not egregiously contradicting something we don't have the rights to, there's a lot of leeway to make room to dramatize and tell some of the best stories that Tolkien ever came up with.
See, that is the most frustrating line to me.
Yeah.
That last line that Tolkien ever came up with. I'm sorry. You might enjoy Rings of Power at this point. Hardly anything in that show is what Tolkien came up with.
Right.
So they kind of, in some ways, I don't feel like they purchased, and I heard Jeff Bezos was involved personally with the negotiations for these rights.
Yeah.
Something like $250 million were spent. I would have to say, in some ways, though, it feels slimy. It doesn't feel like they really earned the right to do this story.
Tell you what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Bezos is not happy.
Is that what you heard?
That's what I heard.
How'd you hear that?
I've been down deep in the rabbit hole of Rings of Power, Amazon, Jeff Bezos. I heard he's not happy with.
Let me tell you this.
What's going on?
I read an older article of an interview with Jeff Bezos before the show was out, basically when they got, the rights to the show. He said, I've always been a huge fan of Tolkien's work, and so is my son. And when I told my son that I had the rights to it, he said, don't F this up.
Yep.
That's what Jeff Bezos' son had to say. So I'm wondering
man.
what Jeff's son is saying today.
You messed it up,
You
Dad.
messed it up.
You burned it up.
I don't really know. What are some final thoughts to this video? I mean, we started off with a fun kind of history of how the rights actually played out.
Mm-hmm.
And it all kind of centered around Saul Zaentz. It all kind of centered around his little company he built for the rights of Tolkien's work. You know, Middle Earth. What was it called? Middle Earth.
Enterprises.
Enterprises. That's right. And then we had someone who was worthy, at least felt worthy to us, you know, coming in with the Lord of the Rings, and then, you know, not as much enjoyment, but at least making a decent story out of the Hobbits, you know?
Yeah.
And then we just get the Rings of Power, and it deteriorated so quickly in my mind.
I think especially in light of... Oh, you had a picture of the Hobbit up there.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Especially in light of the original Lord of the Rings,
Mm-hmm.
which is so good.
Yeah.
It's so enjoyable. I was watching a little bit today of Return of the King.
Mm-hmm.
It just, everything fits, works, feels good. It's classic. It's perfect, in my opinion, perfect high fantasy.
Yeah.
It feels like somebody said it feels like a D&D campaign on screen.
Oh, yeah.
It's everything that you want it to be. I don't know. It's such a weird departure, Rings of Power.
Yeah, it is. And it's not one that we could have expected it, but in some ways we also didn't expect it, you know? Maybe at the start of this year we could see it coming. And before anything was out. Maybe we're like, the amount of stuff the past year and a half, 2 years, the low quality world of Hollywood honestly, a few years now, you kind of could see it coming.
Mm.
I feel like I saw this coming when I watched Tomorrow War. No offense to Chris Pratt. I thought it was trash, and I thought, okay, now Amazon, in my mind, holds real estate for bad storytelling.
Yeah.
And now that's what we're kind of getting from one of the most important stories to fantasy and storytelling in general.
It's the grandfather of modern high fantasy and fiction.
Yes.
Everything before this, there were fairy tales before this. Who was it? I think Brandon. I was listening to Brandon Sanderson talk about it. He said everything before this was a fairy tale that somebody from our world goes into another world and then comes back to our world.
Yeah.
But Tolkien made a world that was its own, that had no reference to ours, that was just... that had its own histories. It had its own gods and people and an entire lore around it and religions and everything. And so it paved the way for everything we see now.
Yeah.
And man, what are you going to do?
I don't know. If there's one thing I'd like this video for people to remember as we come to a close, is that there is one man who did us right, you know, and that we will love him forever. If not Tolkien himself, someone that, you know, wasn't Tolkien, wasn't honestly, you know, didn't resonate with us much outside of his storytelling of Lord of the Rings, but Peter Jackson. He did something beautiful. He captured lightning in a bottle for the few years that he was working on that, and everyone that worked on it with him.
But I mean, you've seen the interview, right? It's been going around the internet, the one where he says we didn't want to put our ideas into it.
I put it in one of our videos.
Tolkien's ideas. Yeah, I didn't even see that.
Yeah, it was when you were at camp.
Oh, okay, yeah, got you.
Yeah. He cared about what Tolkien cared about, and everybody that was with him, that he was held accountable to those ideas. And it's just something that we don't see as much today. In fact, we're eager to jump to our own ideas, our own political narratives, our own limited understanding, honestly. And I was just, although we've ranted about Rings of Power, I was fascinated after seeing all of the trash with it, the things I'm upset about. It kind of renewed my interest in how the Lord of the Rings happened when everything was kind of going against it.
Oh, yeah.
And gaining the rights to it is one of the biggest things, because if you don't have that, you don't have the ability to make a story. So
and it's such a huge production too. I think we'll probably have to do a separate video just talking about production. I'd love
they took 10 hours of behind the scenes.
I'd love to just talk about the production of this
of Lord of the Rings,
the trilogy, because it's such a huge thing.
Absolutely. And although Tolkien begrudgingly had to pay his taxes and had to sell off a few of the rights, we're ever thankful for, I guess, taxes.
I think it's taxes.
If you could take anything away, it's taxes. Gave us the best story ever.
He said he didn't want any of his works to be I'm missing the word here. Developed. What am I thinking?
I know we all know what you're talking
about.
Right.
He didn't want to see his works adapted. Is what I'm trying to say.
It's specifically, bastardized.
Right. But if he hadn't had taxes to pay, we may never have gotten the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah. So if I had a glass of ale, I'd say, here's one for the fascists.
Then again, if he didn't have taxes to pay, we never would have gotten the Rings of Power.
Maybe this has been a road that started happy for like the first 55 years, first 60 years, and then just took a nosedive, and now we're just on a dark, road filled with zombies and demons.
Which would you rather have? Lord of the Rings? My camera just died. Lord of the Rings and Rings of Power, or no Lord of the Rings and just the books and lore and everything, Silmarillion and all that?
Lord of the Rings and Rings of Power.
You know what? I tend to agree, even though it is egregious. In my opinion, a lot of the things that they're doing in the show.
We're here to fight the war. We're young. We're agile. We have strong minds.
And strong bones.
We can win this war against the
corporations.
The corporations that are demolishing and, the dark forces.
The dark forces.
Coming against light.
Amazon.
Honestly. So, Amazon, watch out. The internet's coming for you.
We're coming for you. I mean, we've already seen it, but...
Yeah. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope this was enjoyable and fun. I really appreciate you sticking around. If you would, subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. Leave a comment. Let me know what you learned and if there's any other information that we left out or that you'd like to inform us of. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. We'll see you next time.